Hi, so this is my final presentation for AP Psychology. The topic I chose to focus on is anxiety disorders in the United States. So, this is kind of a brief overview of what I'll be covering in my presentation. I thought it would be easiest to structure my presentation using some key questions. So, the first question is, what constitutes an anxiety disorder and what are the treatments? So, in this, I'll talk a bit about the types of anxiety disorders and what exactly it means to have an anxiety disorder and how to effectively treat a disorder. The second question is, what caused the recent surge in anxiety disorders in the US? For this, I'll discuss some of the main contributing factors in the United States. And for the last question, why do anxiety disorders disproportionately affect citizens in wealthier countries? I'll delve into some other psychological concepts like relative deprivation. So, to start, I wanted to talk about what constitutes an anxiety disorder and how to treat one. There are several types of anxiety disorders. The five most common are generalized anxiety disorder, also known as GAD, obsessive compulsive disorder, also known as OCD, panic disorder, post traumatic stress disorder, also known as PTSD, and social anxiety disorder. The most common types in adolescents and adults are GAD and social anxiety disorder. So, the next thing I wanted to clarify is exactly what it is to have an anxiety disorder. I wanted to stress that having occasional anxiety is not having an anxiety disorder. An anxiety disorder is characterized by four Ds: deviance, distress, dysfunction, and danger. Deviance is the idea that your emotions and behavior deviates from the norm accepted in society. Distress accounts for the consistent negative feelings associated with having a disorder. Dysfunction is a decreased ability to perform everyday functions. And finally, danger is related to violent or harmful behavior toward yourself or another. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to talk about on this slide is treatment options. First, there is the medical model, which believes that a disorder can be diagnosed, treated, and cured, most likely through medication. There is also treatment through counseling and therapy. And lastly, general lifestyle changes like increased exercise, meditation practices, and reduced caffeine intake, to name a few. So, next, I wanted to talk about what has caused the increase in anxiety disorders in the US. First, I think it's important to look at the data surrounding the issue. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental health issue in the US, affecting over 40 million adults in the US, which is over 18% of the population. While the vast majority of these disorders are highly treatable, only 36.9% receive help, suggesting there is a serious awareness issue and even a stigma around seeking treatment for mental health issues. Also, I want to point out an interesting study from 2018. Time magazine conducted a study showing that 40% of Americans felt more anxiety in 2018 than in 2017, and more anxiety in 2017 than in 2016, suggesting that anxiety for the average person is increasing every year. Now, I want to move on to the causes of this increase in anxiety. When discussing the causes of anxiety, especially in young adults, everyone always points to social media use. But honestly, they have a valid point. The rapid increase in anxiety disorders did occur at the turn of the 21st century with the invention of social media apps like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. And millennials have been identified as the most anxious generation. The constant self comparison and feelings of social exclusion that come with social media are cited as the main reasons for anxiety. One of the main reasons. Furthermore, more American adults live alone now compared to just a few decades ago. For example, in 1960, only 7% of adults lived alone, whereas in 2017, over one third of Americans lived alone. This isolation can lead to nervousness and social anxiety. Additionally, with the invention of the smartphone and higher usage of technology and artificial lighting in day to day life, our sleep cycles have been disturbed. The blue light waves from our phones and computers late at night hinders the body's melatonin production. As a general rule, less sleep means more anxiety. And this issue does not just affect the US. In 2011, a large scale study in Europe showed that over 30% of Europeans deal with anxiety, and there have been recent social movements in many East Asian countries to bring awareness to the issues of mental illness and their widespread negative effects on the population. Okay, so now we've reached the final key question, which is why do anxiety disorders disproportionately affect citizens in wealthier countries? My answer is relative deprivation. It's a concept we learned about earlier this year. Essentially, relative deprivation is when you perceive that you are worse off in comparison to those around you. Basically, when we stop worrying about where we'll get our next meal and if we'll survive another day, we start becoming too attached to unnecessary material goods and become obsessed with comparing ourselves with others. In developed countries with all their possessions and amenities, more people feel bad about their own standing in society, causing disorders like anxiety. In 2004, a study in the Journal of Mental Health Policy and Economics proved just that. Relative deprivation in wealthier countries is associated with an increased likelihood of probable anxiety disorders. Furthermore, in another study from 2017, it was found that in low income countries, only 1.6% of the population suffered from GAD, whereas in high income countries, over 5% were affected. Before I wrap up this presentation, I did want to talk a little bit about the drawbacks to these studies. First, the increase in anxiety disorders may be because of underreporting in the past. There simply wasn't the infrastructure in many places to diagnose and treat anxiety disorders. Additionally, the stigmatization of mental health issues in developed countries may have had more people feeling open about their disorder. This lack of acceptance in many poor nations may have slightly influenced their lower numbers. However, even with these drawbacks, I still believe that living in a wealthy, developed nation like the US leads to more anxiety disorders within the population. Here is my works cited page. And this brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you for listening.